All right. Welcome everyone to the first session of the PAAV Summit 2021. This session is about pathway to deployment. My name is Vijay Varadarajan and I will be moderating today's event. I am a senior project manager with HNTB supporting transformational technology projects around the country. I am also a planning committee member of this summit. I would like to thank you all for taking time to listen for a fantastic lineup of speakers for this session. A few housekeeping items before we begin. So you're all aware the session will be recorded and will be available to the other attendees later this year. You will also see that your microphone has been automatically muted to reduce background noise. Please feel free to use the chat function on the right-hand side of your screen for general conversation and comments, and the QA section to ask questions about the presentation and upvote the questions you would most like to hear answered. So with that, transformational technologies, including connected vehicles, automated vehicles, electric vehicles, shared mobility, and smart city technologies, are all maturing. They're all maturing at a different rate, some faster, some slower. Their path to deployment starts with research, from there moving on to conducting pilot, small-scale deployment, and then to wide-scale deployment. Lots of stakeholders are involved with accelerating the path to deployment in a safe, smarter, efficient, and equitable manner. Some of the stakeholders are national level, some statewide, some local, and some from the industry. How awesome it would be to hear from the leaders who work day in and day out, accelerating the pathway to deployment, especially discussing the opportunities, challenges, lessons learned, and best practices from their experiences. Well, today is an awesome day, and this is an awesome section because we're going to hear from these leaders. We're going to hear from Rob Heilman of USDOT talking from the national perspective, Ashley Nylen of Colorado DOT talking from the state perspective, and Lauren Isaac of EasyMile talking from the industry perspective. We will start with the speaker presentation, followed by a panel discussion. For the panel discussion, I will be pulling questions from the Q&A section. So if you have any questions, please post them in the Q&A part of the chat window. If you post it in the chat, we may miss them. Without any further delay, our first presenter today is Rob Heilman, the USDOT Highly Automated Systems Safety Center for Excellence Director. Full bio for all the speakers are available in the Summit program and on the Summit website. With that, Rob.
Oh, I'm very happy to be with you all today, and allow me to pull up my presentation, and hopefully I will be able to share my screen successfully here. Let me see if we can figure that out. All right. Can somebody tell me if y'all can see my screen just fine? Can you see my presentation? And can you hear me just fine? Anybody?
We can hear you, Rob.
So?
Yep. We got all this thumbs up going there.
Okay, sorry, I can't see anything other than my screen at the moment.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
All right, so thanks so much. So again, very happy to be with you today. Thank you, Vijay, for that introduction. I'm just going to launch right into it. Just have 10 minutes to get through the presentation, but really looking forward to the Q&A and addressing any questions that you have with my fellow panelists. I'm just going to provide a really quick overview of the office that I have the distinct pleasure of managing at USDOT. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of our impressions on what the transportation system of the future might look like. And then to the focus of this session, what are some of the challenges to the deployment of automated vehicles from a bit of a national perspective, at least out of the office that I sit in and the folks that I support? And then maybe even more importantly, some of the opportunities. I work within the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Research and Technology. And it's also the Office of the Chief Science Officer. It's a pretty cool job to report directly to the Chief Science Officer for USDOT. The office that I direct is once again the Highly Automated System Safety Center of Excellence. It's kind of a mouthful. So like everybody in the government, we acronymize it to the congressional language that Congress directed DOT to stand up this office. And our mandate is essentially to ensure that USDOT has a workforce, as you can read there, to review, assess, and validate the safety of highly automated systems, which is basically the automated systems without a lot of human intervention, across all modes of transportation. Also to be a central location within USDOT for expertise in automation and related technologies, which are the usual suspects of artificial intelligence, machine learning, cybersecurity, data science, things of that nature. And we're there to support all of the operating administrations like Federal Highway, NHTSA, Federal Transit, FMCSA, basically all of them across the USDOT, FAA. The kind of the obligatory organizational chart, won't dwell on it, but as you can see there, again, I have the pleasure of reporting directly to Dr. Hampshire, who's the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Research, nominated to be the Assistant Secretary, and he's also again the Chief Science Officer. So this is a kind of a representation of what I would consider to be the transportation system of the past. They were really kind of separated by very bright lines there between space, aviation, and surface. And within surface, further separated by rail, maritime, heavy vehicle, light vehicle. But that's really not the transportation system of the future. Kind of see these bright lines starting to disappear. They're fading pretty fast. We're really heading towards an integrated and ubiquitously connected transportation system. And if we do it right, it'll be resilient. If we do it right, it'll be interoperable. One way or the other, it's going to be really more of a one holistic system of systems, where those bright lines that separated the different domains of transportation are really dissolving. That's a lot of part of what I want to talk to you about today with the challenges and the opportunities to the transportation system of the future. And it's really going to be the networks, though, that are going to stitch together these different domains, and the data that flows through those networks is really going to be the lifeblood that these systems, they're going to be sharing this data, and we're going to have UASs, unmanned aerial systems, that are going to be traversing. If you look at advanced air mobility, if you look at UAS traffic management, you have these drones that are going to be delivering packages. You're going to have these air taxis delivering people. You're going to have these systems that are going to be taking off in the ground, in the surface transportation, going to low altitude aviation domains, and then landing back again down in surface. Same thing with drone package delivery. Is that really a surface problem? Is that an aviation problem? What happens when you have suborbital passenger delivery, when transcontinental kind of space flight, when you're trying to, you can go from, say, New York to Europe in a couple of hours. What's that? Is that surface? Is that aviation? Is that space? I mean, we're really moving towards one transportation ecosystem, and it's going to be highly integrated. So we better start figuring out how we're going to manage this integrated system of systems. So what are some of these challenges on the pathway to what I would call responsible deployment? Well, first of all, we got to figure out how we are going to, and especially particularly for automated vehicles, let's say, which is I guess the focus of this particular summit. Well, we better figure out how we're going to take care of safety validation and certification. I would say that we are not there. Are we getting close? A lot of people working on it. Certainly the folks within the building I work in are working on it. State DOTs are certainly working on it. Have we coalesced around a common solution? No. Much work there. Data privacy and ownership. When I spent 4 years at NHTSA before I went to the Office of the Secretary, managed the research division for ADS, managed the research division for a while for ADAS, started a research project for the next generation of the event data recorder. How do we do event data recording for sensor-laden vehicles, for ADAS, and then eventually ADS vehicles? What data should we extract? Who owns that data? How do we take care of privacy? Well, there's some pretty big decisions. My office right now is responsible for extracting and aggregating and analyzing the data out of the ADS demo grant, $60 million that DOD spent for 8 projects across the country on ADS demos and data. So what role should the government have in collecting that data, aggregating, analyzing it, and reflecting it back for the greater good? Who owns that data? And how do we deal with privacy? Don't really know. A lot of work to be done there. How are we going to work that out together? Liability and risk. Right? Who's liable when an automated vehicle gets into an accident? And how do we characterize and how do we measure risk for a machine driver? When we delegate and relegate the sensing and cognitive functions from a human to a machine, who's responsible? And how do we characterize, how do we articulate, what's the vernacular for, how do we measure risk? That's a tough one. And I really believe we got to start applying some systems thinking. Right now, it is so fragmented. We got patchworks of everything going on. How do we come together, like through this summit, and start applying a systems approach? If we don't, interoperability is going to be a nightmare. And if we don't take care of interoperability and we start thinking about this from a systems approach, cybersecurity is going to be impossible. And then without that, resiliency is going to be impossible to achieve. And then how do we build for the future? We got this massive infrastructure bill coming through. That's going to come into USDOT. DOT is going to be in a tremendous amount of pressure to push that out to the states. They're going to be under a tremendous amount of pressure to push that money out to industry and to the regions. And how do we ensure that when we apply that funding, that we're building for the future, that we are not just going to fix things and in 50 years we have a 150-year-old infrastructure and it is not prepared for tomorrow, right? How do we ensure that we have built it for AVs and not built it for vehicles that were designed 50 years ago? How do we do that? And how do we ensure that we haven't made the same mistakes? Equity, access, and climate. How do we go ahead and design, architect, and build out a transportation system that is designed in a way, implemented in a way that does not make the same mistakes that we've made in the past? And who is on first, right? Who is, what is the federal role? What is the state role? What is industry's role, right? Who validates and certifies for safety of an AV, right? Who's responsible for the driver when the driver is the vehicle? Is it the states? Is it the feds? Who's on first? Who has the roles and responsibilities when we're talking about AVs? So these are some really, really tough decisions to be made. But those are the challenges, and those are tough. Those are tough problems. But those tough problems are significantly outweighed by the amazing opportunities, right? So I'm a research guy, right? I'm a technologist, love technology. So a couple of thoughts about technology. Pretty much, I think, out of time. So let me talk about opportunities that comes with all of this technology, right? We do a pretty good job of being able to try to predict what's going to happen. But it's really, really hard when we have all this transformational technology that's facing us. What we have here is a whole bunch of exponential technologies that are converging. Exponential technology, anything exponential, is really, really hard to predict, right? Because we're trained to think linearly. We are not trained, our brains are not trained to wrap our minds around anything exponential. It is just hard. You have multiple exponential technologies that converge, it becomes nearly impossible to predict. Okay, but even if we could predict it, then it's really hard to extrapolate. But what we tend to do is take a look at back the last 5 years and say, "Wow, technology is so amazing; it's moving so fast." Right, and then what we tend to do is say, "That was really cool. What happened in the last 5 years? This thing was going to happen 5 years from now." And we think that the pace of technology that we've just experienced is the same pace we're going to experience, and it's not, right? Because that's not exponential growth, right? And so what we need to do is apply our imagination, and science allows us to do that. Science does not trap us into the known. It allows us, it liberates us and our imagination into the possibilities of the unknown. It's the art of the possible, right? And so do that. Do that. I encourage you, I implore you to apply your imagination, right? All of these technologies, this change is relentless, right? And that is not a bad thing. It's the opportunity, right? The future is watching us, okay? And this is a rare, incredible inflection point, a moment in history. And we must rise to that moment. We got all of this money coming, one way or the other. Congress will get it done and get this infrastructure bill passed, and all of this money will come, right? And so we have all of this technology. It will mature. We don't know exactly when. AI has been coming forever. Right? The driverless cars have been coming forever. We don't know when exactly it's going to mature. We don't know when level 5 is going to come. Maybe not ever. Who knows? Or in our lifetime. But level 4 is going to come, and at some point, we don't know exactly when. Right? But all of this technology is coming. It is going to converge. It is going to develop into some applications. Right? It is going to happen. We need to meld that, shape that into a future we desire. We don't just sit here and watch. We don't witness. We don't observe. We shape it, right? That's our jobs. That is our collective job, right? So let's do it. Let's take this opportunity, and it is time for us to rise to the moment. My wife is going to, look at this. You are preaching. I'm in a conference, honey. I'm in a summit in front of a bunch of people. And so it is time now. Take the opportunity. Thank you very much. You can take me off the stage now.
Thank you so much, Rob. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. A lot of new things that at least I learned is it's not only enough to have a clear pathway to deployment, but it should be a responsible path to deployment, and also the importance of imagination in shaping the future. Thank you so much, Rob. Audience, please remember to post any questions you may have about Rob's presentation and/or vote on questions you would like answered in the Q&A function on the right hand of your screen. Our next presenter is Ashley Nylen from Colorado's DOT's Assistant Director for Mobility Technology. With that, Ashley.
Great. Thank you, Vijay. And I trust that you all can hear me okay, and it looks like my slides are coming through. Thank you everyone for having me here today. Hopefully this is a nice follow-up to what you heard at the federal level. I'm going to focus more on the state approach, particularly the approach that we have in the state of Colorado. So I will very quickly just give you a little bit of a background of where my office resides in our department, and then speak to the regulatory framework that we have in Colorado, and give a preview of some of the deployments that we've had to date. So as I mentioned, I am with the Colorado Department of Transportation. My program is known as the Mobility Technology Program. I sit within what's known as the Office of Innovative Mobility at CDOT. That is the divisional end of our department that's focused on emerging transportation technologies, system efficiency, energy efficiency, transit and rail, multimodal electrification. But particularly my program focuses on emerging transportation technologies, so largely the deployment of connected vehicle technology, and also the automation, as we move towards higher levels of vehicle automation. So just to give a quick framework of some of the things that we're doing, again, I'll only spend a minute or two just to give some backdrop. We do have a roadmap in Colorado that nicely lays out what our focus is when it comes to automated vehicle technology and higher levels of vehicle automation. So we have three focus areas, first being policy and recommendations, and that does include the coordination of our Autonomous Mobility Task Force, which is the regulatory framework here in the state of Colorado, which I'll touch on in a moment, and then also our involvement in various national efforts and collaboration with the country. I'm sure as many of you know, there are several wonderful work groups at the national level, whether it's under USDOT or Asst or some of those other wonderful groups that we do participate and are active engagers in. Second pillar is technology piloting. So leveraging some of those emerging technologies and proofs of concepts, demonstrations, working with the industry to understand how that can accelerate safety and mobility in the state of Colorado and in our transportation system. And then lastly, a focus on data. So how does data, whether it's from an autonomous vehicle or a connected vehicle, how does that push forward for CDOT and for our Colorado residents and those that are residing here? So to move over, switch gears to our regulatory framework here in the state of Colorado, we do have what's known as the Autonomous Mobility Task Force. This was largely enabled by Senate Bill 17-213 that passed back in 2017. And a few things that I like to highlight for this bill, and my materials will be available in all of the links on here. You can go click on them. But the bill did first and foremost define what an automated driving system is here in the state of Colorado. And the reason that I like to highlight that is that threshold or definition is important to what triggers involvement and review of the task force process. So you see the definition there. It's collectively a system that has hardware and software that are capable without intervention or supervision by a human operator to perform all aspects of that dynamic driving task. A few highlights there is that the vehicle may not comply with it. It would trigger the task force process if it does not comply with any local, federal, or state law, or if it removes if it removes a human from that driving operation. The task force is comprised of three state agencies here in Colorado. Colorado Department of Transportation, which serves as the chair, and then Colorado State Patrol, which oversees, of course, or regulates our roadways, I should say, and then finally the Department of Revenue. And Revenue here in Colorado, that's where our motor vehicle division does sit. It's under our Department of Revenue, our sister agency there. Some DOTs, it's within their, or some states, I should say, it's within their DOT. Others, it's in a different state department. And so for here in Colorado, it's in Revenue. So that's why Revenue is at the table for that licensing and registration. And the task force responsibilities are to first and foremost, we were to establish what the task force is, the framework of the task force, and then establish all of the different requirements for an applicant that's interested in testing in Colorado that meets that definition that I just mentioned. What is the process that they have to go through, which I'm going to highlight here in a moment. So as I had said, we have our three state agencies. Largely, this is leadership within each department, which in within each state department. We do have our Attorney General that sits on as a subject matter expert. And then also my program does provide staff support to the task force. We largely meet on an ad hoc basis as we have application requests to the task force. And again, all of that is administered and coordinated by CDOT to support the broader task force. So what does the process look like for an applicant? Well, I have it outlined here on the right side, and I won't go through each step. But largely, an applicant will usually come to CDOT inquiring about what our process looks like. All of our materials are fully available online. There is a packet of information that needs to be completed in full by anyone that's interested in submitting an application to the task force. Once that information has been submitted and reviewed by staff, that is formally passed on the task force for consideration. We do have an inspection that occurs as they go through the process. Of course, there's final paperwork that needs to get done. All of this is, again, outlined in that packet of information. One thing I want to highlight that we did add on this year is we added on an expedited review process. That is, again, outlined in that packet of information, but that expedited review process is for those deployers that have come to the task force in Colorado previously, have had a successful and safe deployment, and largely their deployment is meeting the same operational design domain as previous deployments. So there are steps in this full process that you see here that we go ahead and remove from that expedited review process. So largely the inspection of all vehicles, things of that nature, are just expedited for the sake of the task force, to remove burden from the task force and also from the applicant. All right, just a few deployments to date that I do want to highlight that we've had here in Colorado that have gone through our Autonomous Mobility Task Force. On the left here, you see past deployments, which you're going to hear from Laura and Isaac here in a moment from EasyMile. They have been one of our frequent flyers or repeat customers, if you will. So in 2018, we had our first deployment that went through task force review with the shuttle out in Denver. And then last summer, we did have EasyMile again coming to the task force to support a use case around the movement of goods. Our currently active deployments that are active through the task force under current their application has been approved and submitted are first CDOT's own application, which features one of our work zone vehicles. We have a work zone follow vehicle known as a truck mounted attenuator that typically we have a male or female crew operator in that's following, in this case, paint striping. So that autonomous attenuator is following that slow moving paint striping vehicle to provide protection to our paint stripers that would typically be back here. Anyway, we've completely removed the human from that work zone vehicle, so they are not in that vehicle that's designed to be struck. We actually have two vehicles that are approved for deployment in the state, one in our northern portion of our state, and then one in the southwestern portion. Again, more information is available on the CDOT website regarding that particular deployment. Then on the bottom here, our most recent applicant to the task force is the Colorado School of Mines, City of Golden EasyMile, which again is one of the EasyMile shuttles in the City of Golden for the School of Mines, serving public transit needs and sort of first mile, last mile connections. So I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. Again, this material will be completely available. All of our packet of information for our task force is available. And please do feel free to reach out to me with any questions. We've certainly learned a number of lessons here as we have a task force and regulatory framework for deployment and are happy to share and collaborate with other states as you're sort of learning through the process as we all are. Thank you.
Vijay, I think you're on mute.
Yes, thank you. There are two mute buttons. Thank you. Appreciate it. So thank you. Thank you, Ashley. Great presentation. Today is great. Your presentation is awesome again. So thank you for talking about the importance of task force in moving the deployment along. So with that, audience, please remember to post any questions you may have about Ashley's presentation and our vote on questions you would like answered in the Q&A function on the right hand of your screen. Our last presenter is Lauren Isaac of EasyMile, who is the Managing Director for North America. With that, Lauren.
Thank you so much, Vijay. So it's a pleasure to be here. I think it is very apropos to follow the federal and state presentations, especially since, like Ashley said, we're a frequent flyer in the Colorado program. So just to give some perspective, we've been operating in the United States now since 2017 and operating even longer elsewhere in the world. And so we do have a lot of lessons learned. I'm going to give a quick intro to the company and our vehicles, and then dive into some lessons learned just to share some perspective on what we've experienced. And quick background on me, I've been with EasyMile for 3.5 years now. So I've gotten to experience actually a wide range of roles, but also gotten to see a lot from what we've put on the road. I'm actually very proud to be one of the first all around the country. So it's been a pleasure. With regards to EasyMile, so we are a driverless technology company. And what that means is we specialize in the software and the technology, and we partner with established blue chip manufacturers to be able to automate different vehicle types. And I'll talk more about the vehicles in a minute. So as a company, we are based in France. We've been in existence since 2014. So I joke that we're one of the oldest in the industry, even though we're only at this point 7 years old. We have over 180 of our autonomous shuttles manufactured, and we have, because with those vehicles and some others, we have over 600,000 miles of actual autonomous driving experience. And this is actually many of them on public roads and mixed traffic. So lots to share from that. We've been in over 30 countries, so we've had the pleasure of navigating the regulations in all of those countries and in many times in the provinces or states within. As a company, we are ISO 9001 certified. We're very proud of the fact that we take quality processes extremely seriously. And we are a private company with investment from a variety of strategic investors, including, for example, Continental and Alstom. So just to get into the jargon really quickly, we focus on the level 4 technology. So for those of you that are not familiar with the SAE levels of automation, you have level 0, which is a driver does everything, all the way up to level 5, which is kind of the dream where a person doesn't have to do absolutely anything at all. It's debatable if level 5 is going to exist anytime soon, if ever. But we, along with most of the driverless technology companies that are aiming to go truly driverless, are focused on level 4, which means that we can remove the safety operator or a driver in a known area, in an established operational design domain. So we focus, for EasyMile, we are focused on lower speed environments, largely campus-like environments, so a contained area, but it can very much be in mixed traffic, day or night, in a variety of weather, etc. So the vehicles that we have automated actually range across the material handling vehicles as well as passenger transport. We are for sure most known for our EZ10, which is the driverless shuttle, but we're very proud of the fact that we have actually partnered with a lot of other passenger vehicle companies, including Stellantis, which is the newly formed Chrysler company. We've been working with them where we've automated their van. We are working in Europe to automate Iveco's full-size bus. On the material handling side, we have a commercially available automated baggage tractor that we've put our technology on TLD's Jet 16. So that's the kind of vehicle you would see operating in an airport or a warehouse or factory floor, as well as other examples on the material handling side. So just to give a little deeper dive into the EZ10, this is a driverless electric shuttle custom built for autonomy. It can fit up to 6 people. It actually could fit more people standing, but in the United States, we are required to have people in seatbelts. The vehicle is all electric. It can operate up to 16 hours with no additional charge, but it's less than that if the heater or the air conditioner are running. The vehicle is ADA compliant. It has an automatically deploying wheelchair ramp, as well as tie downs. In terms of how the technology works, it operates on a pre-mapped network of roads. So that means it essentially operates on a rail. It's just there's no additional infrastructure added to the road. So it will stay to an accuracy of a few millimeters on the exact path that it is programmed to operate. So we have about 30 of these in the United States, more obviously globally. It is low speed, so this Easy 10 can operate up to 12 miles an hour. So we, of course, are very careful not to put it in operating environments where the other vehicles are going any faster than 30 miles an hour. I'll just dive into really quickly the kind of 7 key learnings that I thought would be worthwhile highlighting based on our experience to date. So I'll just jump into these. So the first one is that the demand is strong. It's actually really exciting to see globally that there's interest in more mobility options. And I think especially as we see younger people not wanting to necessarily own cars, I think that the people want options. And so if we want to reduce the number of cars on the street, we need to provide good public transportation options. And that's why when Ashley mentioned our project at the Colorado School of Mines in Golden, Colorado, we're excited to actually showcase a fleet of these vehicles in operation. So second one is that there are still challenges. I think the 2 that I wanted to mention, one is how do you measure what is a safe vehicle? Do you say that it just needs to be as safe as the human operator? Because frankly, we humans are not that safe. So can we do better than us? And then we also need to do it acknowledging what infrastructure is already on the ground. And that it's not just a matter of saying, well, we've gone 10,000 miles, so obviously we're safe. There are a lot of questions around that, which is quite aligned with the regulation side of it. And you've heard from the regulators themselves, but it's really just a question of what do those regulations look like and how do we create standards around them? So the next one is about the business case. So we want to really highlight the fact that there are some very tangible benefits, especially when you truly take the driver out. I know that on the transit side, the direct human cost is about 70% of the total cost of ownership with vehicles. So obviously the savings could be massive. But at the same time, there are other kind of intangible benefits like adding a new mobility service, giving additional flexibility, not having to work around human kind of timing and operational hours. And then the indirect benefits, which I think are actually still really important. I like that we have it at the base of the period. So having it promote a safer environment, less pollution because these are green vehicles. All of our vehicles are electric. They're accessible. I think these are all, it's important that all of these things I mentioned are just largely supporting public agency goals and specifically public transit goals. But we also have to acknowledge that there is an upfront cost. I mean, these vehicles are not cheap. We are the first to say that. If you put all these sensors on the vehicles and the technology, and if you still have safety operators, you're definitely going to have higher upfront costs. If you can start to reduce the safety operators, then your costs actually can go down. And we have models that can show this actually, but it's shifting for the industry how to look at pricing for these things and how to think through what that business model looks like. And so the real challenge is it's a chicken and egg issue. Like, how do we get to the point where agencies will deploy full fleets of vehicles where you can reap these benefits without having a full track record to show that it's been done, which is kind of where we're at right now in the industry. And this is where political will is just so important. And this is actually a picture from our project in Golden showing a whole bunch of these vehicles in one site, which is really exciting for us, but it takes a lot to get to the point where you can have this many vehicles in one place and actually have the funding to support that. Public acceptance, this is always mentioned with autonomous vehicles. And I just want to say that all of our projects, I shouldn't say all, but many of our projects have had surveys. And for all of those projects with surveys, the perception is usually extremely positive. People just need to experience it to be able to have that learning. Communication is vital. This is true with any public transit service. You need to actually tell people about what they're going to be embarking on or what they're going to see on the road. And finally, we do want to highlight that people are still really important in these services. Even if we remove the safety operator, you still need someone to start the service, make sure that the vehicle is of the appropriate operational capacity to be able to, and then there needs to be some supervision. So what I wanted to actually share is what's next. EasyMile is actually in the process of automating this shuttle that you see on the screen. We won a Federal Transit Administration grant in partnership with Houston Metro, as well as Phoenix Motor Cars. Phoenix Motor Cars takes a traditional Starcraft Ford E450 vehicle, and they electrify it. And then we won this grant to be able to put our technology on the vehicle. So starting in September of next year, this vehicle will be on the streets in Houston, Texas. We are really excited because this is, from our perspective, so important and vital for the United States public transportation. And that's because this vehicle, besides the fact that it is automated and we will be able to remove the safety operator in certain situations, it's also compliant with Buy America, ADA, and the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards. So it kind of addresses a lot of the challenges that we've experienced to date. So that's really what's coming next. And with that, this is my contact information. I look forward to some discussion and some questions, but I hope that gives some perspective on where we're at with our autonomous vehicle deployments. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Lauren, for that wonderful, awesome industry perspective on the lessons learned when it comes to technology pathway to deployment. So with this concludes the presentation portion of our program. Thank you to all our speakers for their great presentations. Now we will begin the Q&A session of today's events. Again, please feel free to input any questions you may have for our speakers into the Q&A section on the right-hand side of your screen. You may also upvote the questions you would like to be answered. So with that said, we have few questions. I'm going to go with the ones which has higher number of votes. So with that, the first question is, if the USDOT, NHTSA, and FMCSA and other model agencies leave AV testing and commercialization requirements to the states, how does the industry move forward with regulatory confidence? We have three speakers, one from national, one from state, and one from the industry. So anyone could take, who wants to take this question? Any volunteers?
Well, this is Rob. I'll start. Yeah, I work out of the office of the secretary, which is a large office, right? I work out of the office of the assistant secretary for research. So I am not within a regulatory component of USDOT. So I cannot speak of regulatory matters. But I can share the concern that the inconsistency of a regulatory framework at a national level is problematic for all parties, and it is a issue that is recognized at all levels, I believe, of the government. And so there was, as I understand it, a framework, a regulatory framework, safety framework that was posted by NHTSA, and comments were solicited by NHTSA from the public. Where this administration is going to go next, I think, is in terms of AV policy. It's still something that is being discussed. And so we'll have to see where they go. They're taking a very deliberate approach, and in discussions with some states, all the states, and where the role is, what is the appropriate role between the states and the federal regulators. And then, unfortunately, I can't provide any additional details than that. But it'd be interesting to hear what the state and the industry perspective is on this discussion, this topic. Over.
Ashley or Lauren?
Sure, I'll chime in a bit here. Speaking, solely from Colorado's perspective, and certainly, what we've observed nationally as we engage with our and other industry folks. One thing that we've received as a positive piece of feedback is simply having a framework for those in the industry to go through. I've heard feedback that it provides some transparency to the process. It provides assurance of what are requirements to deploy on that particular roadway, and also provides a conduit and framework. So, I will say we by no means have all of the answers. Certainly, there are other states across the country that have other models that work well for their state. I think one thing that Colorado did exceptionally well is, taking a lay of the land of what is it that we need from a state perspective, that allows sort of the balance of having a framework that is the right size, right fit for our state, but also being extremely mindful that we are in a sector that is just ripe for change. So being able to pivot as the technology pivots, as it grows. If we find something that doesn't work in our task force process, we have a conduit to improve that. So that's something that I would add on. So it's not answering the direct question of how to provide confidence to the industry and the regulatory framework, but it's sort of what I have seen has worked extremely well here in Colorado.
So from the industry perspective, I can tell you that it has been challenging in general, handling regulations globally. So, and that's a very generic statement, but right now we are subject to NHTSA federal guidelines just because with our EZ10s, the vehicles are not traditional, right? They don't have the traditional rear view mirrors and foot brakes. And because of that, and they're imported, we are subject to a very specific process. And it's a pretty involved process, and it's something that has changed a lot in the last 4 years. So that's one thing. And then at the state level, we've deployed at this point in probably at least 20 different states. And I can tell you that the process is 100% different in every single state. And some states have a regulatory framework. Some are more involved than others, and some don't have any at all. And like Ashley said, we have absolutely found that the ones that have a regulatory framework are actually easier, because it usually means that there's a process that people have already agreed upon. The key stakeholders are already involved. And when we go to get our license, we are not in a position to walk into a DMV and have to introduce ourselves with our driverless shuttle and say, hi, we really need help, because we've had to do that in other states, not Colorado, and it was not easy. And so having a framework helps a lot. But the fact that we are dealing with different frameworks and the federal government is a lot for us. So that's just kind of like where we stand at this point.
Oh, thank you. Let's move on to the next question. We have 6 votes. For you, Lauren. So you mentioned that vehicles.
Excuse me, Vijay. Not to draw this particular question out. I just feel like I provided a pretty lame answer. The the lack of predictability, is very difficult for the practitioners. There's no doubt about it. And the developers, the investors, if we can, and having a framework, having some process to follow certainly would help. And if there was some consistency in that across the country, and for that matter, across the world, you would think would bring a tremendous amount of efficiency to the process. And intuitively, one would believe that could actually accelerate the development and the implementation, and bring efficiency to the whole process. And perhaps a broader context for the entire group here, not just the panelists, but for the entire group to consider, and is what I think that all regulators struggle with at the federal and at the state level and at the international level. Is where do you draw that line? Right? Where does regulation fit? Where do standards fit? What is the right amount of heavy-handedness in regulation, and where should you have a very light touch? Where do standards belong, and where should it just be completely open-ended, such that you allow creativity and innovation to flourish? Where does standardization allow for interoperability, and where does that interoperability actually accelerate innovation? And at what point have you gone so far that you start to stifle and box in innovation creativity and this, out of the box thinking. So where do you find the appropriate? Where do you draw that line? And when is the right time? Right. So it's not just a matter of what is the appropriate amount of regulation or standardization, but when is the right time? And I think that we all struggle with that. Right? And then how do we coordinate with each other to find who has the right role between the international bodies, the federal bodies, and the state and regional bodies? And so that is such a complicated combination of factors and players that it becomes such an entangled array of challenges that we just haven't seemed to be able to work through. And then when you add that with just how quickly the ground seems to move underneath you with this technology, and then society's views on all of this, with the whole notion of trust in artificial intelligence and some of the related technologies, and then we just can't seem to be able to all keep up with it. And so I'm not offering any answers here, and I'm not trying to make any excuses, but I'm just trying to lay out some perspectives on how we approach the problem. So I don't think that I contributed in any way to this discussion, other than to say that when we walk into our conference rooms in our respective organizations, this is what we ponder, as we face each other across the table. But what we don't do enough of is get into conference rooms together, right? Where us feds are in the rooms with the states, or we're in the rooms with EasyMile. So, we need to do more of that. And in conversations like these, and with the folks that are joining us in this large virtual room. So with that, turn it back to Vijay.
Thank you. Thank you, Rob. That makes total sense. Like, it's definitely complicated and complex, and conversations like this will move the industry forward. It's the second question we have for you is, Lauren. You maintain route precision to within millimeters, especially as EasyMile prepares for deployment of larger vehicles. Have they considered negative impacts to pavements?
Yeah, that was something we learned early on. There was one of our first projects. We realized that about, I don't know, maybe 2 months into the project, that the pavement started to have some not grooves, but, like the actual tire markings, because the vehicles were operating in that exact same spot every single time. So one of our very early lessons on was to actually go back and remap and just move the vehicle by a matter of a few millimeters, just to kind of give it a different path every once in a while. So yeah.
That's very interesting. Let's move on to the next one, which is, I see no mention of AVs in the draft infrastructure bill. Will the federal government ever move beyond providing reason for private firms to wait for the feds?
I mean, one thing I'll say to that is that I think that the business model for autonomous vehicles is still being figured out, which is why you see a variety of different players focused on a variety of different business models. Some are business to consumer, like your ride hailing type companies that are investing. But some, like what we're doing with most of our vehicles, it's B2G or B2B, business to business or business to government. So that's one piece. The other thing I'll say is, last time I looked at the draft language, which I can't say was that recently, there was still some funding around smart cities projects and other related. So I don't think that it's completely non-existent, but I think it's kind of reflective of where the industry is at, where it's still kind of being figured out. But the one other thing I'll say is, clearly there's an investment in electric vehicles, which in our case actually aligns quite well with our vehicles. So we get best of both worlds.
Rob, do you have any take on this?
Well, I would just mirror a lot of what Lauren said, that there is a significant amount of investment in electric vehicles. There's a significant amount of investment in smart cities in the draft language. There are a number of, I don't know if I call them companion draft legislation on AV bills that are still, as I understand it, under consideration. I just didn't know if they wanted to kind of mix it in with the whole notion of infrastructure. And so and within the smart city, as Lauren implied, the whole notion of connected and connectivity, electrification, and automation tends to get bundled to a fair degree. And so I do believe that you'll see some investment in automation related technologies in more of an integrated fashion. How do we integrate all of these different technologies as we move forward?
Thank you. The next question is for Lauren. You mentioned being as safe as a bus driver, but unique and problems with autonomy are systematic. What is safe enough for different ODDs?
Well, isn't that the question? That is a tough question to answer. I will tell you the approach that EasyMile is taking is to look at safety certifications for comparable industries and vehicles. And so we are aligning with the automobile industry for our relevant vehicles to make sure that we are working towards ASIL B, C, D certification as relevant. We are working and in many cases informing different types of standards that are out there. So, I mean, that is a really tricky question. I think that we are both developing and working with regulators and standards developers to actually work on an answer to that.
Thank you. So we have 1 minute left over, so I'm going to ask one question to each of the panelists and see if you could answer that in less than 10-15 seconds. If you have a magic wand and you could swipe, what would you want changed in the near future? With that, let's start with Ashley.
Well, that is a tough question to give us 10 or 15 seconds to answer. Well, I think in a perfect world, this technology would seamlessly integrate and it would seamlessly address all of our issues that plague our roadways, right? I mean, as a state DOT, first and foremost, we want to have the safest experience on our roadways for anyone that's traveling from A to B. And, everything that we do inherently as a state DOT is to improve safety. So if I had a magic wand, everybody would get from A to B to C safely, on time, in the most efficient way. But we all know that's not the reality that we're working with. So continuing to leverage and understand how technology can help us achieve that end all be all, I think is, what we're all working toward here. Thank you, Vijay.
Thank you, Ashley. How about Lauren?
Speaking of that silver bullet for mobility, and this is why I got into autonomy, I think it's all about getting people into shared and electric vehicles. And so for me, autonomy represents an opportunity to introduce change. So if I could wave my magic wand, I would want to put fleets of public, meaning shared autonomous vehicles out there so that people would actually question their current, driving in a single occupancy vehicle behavior and actually try something new. And I think autonomy is like that sexy thing that could swing that way. And we just need to get enough of them out there.
Thank you. How about Rob?
The selfish side of me would be to wave that magic wand and grow my hair back. But I probably, the unselfish side of me would say to wave the wand and we would have a unified, shared vision of the transportation system of the future, how it serves all of us and represents the values, our shared values for this nation and the world, and turns and allows us to be a global leader that we're proud of, and that makes us proud in the eyes of future generations. Like we rise to the moment, as I mentioned, and we're proud, and future generations are proud of what we've done. And then we're able to architect that transportation system of the future. And so that would be what I would do with my magic wand.
Thank you. As a moderator, if I had a magic wand, I would like to see how we could get more information compressed in a smaller time. So with that, thank you to the speakers for the thoughtful discussion and you all for your great questions. I know we could not get all the questions, but those are all great questions. And we will now exit presentation mode and go back into the conference room mode where you will have the next 15 minutes to chat with other attendees.